The end of mystical expertise. AI is forcing professions to distinguish between performance and method. Too long, didn't read artificial intelligence is not primarily replacing expertise. It is exposing it. For generations, many professions have relied upon forms of expertise that produced valuable outcomes without producing reproducible explanations. AI challenges this arrangement because it amplifies structure more effectively than intuition. As a result, professions are being forced to confront a distinction they have often avoided: the distinction between performance and method. The future may belong not to those who merely possess AI tools, but to those who can transform expertise into form. The great misunderstanding about AI. The great misunderstanding about artificial intelligence begins with how most people encounter it. At the most basic level of adoption, AI is experienced as a tool. It drafts emails, summarizes documents, answers questions, and generates content. Users naturally compare it to earlier technologies, search engines, spreadsheets, databases, or office software. The implicit assumption is straightforward. AI is simply a more sophisticated instrument placed in the hands of an individual professional. From this perspective, the dominant formula appears self-evident. Human plus AI equal to better human. The lawyer becomes faster. The consultant becomes more productive. The researcher processes more information. The programmer writes more code. AI appears to function as a general-purpose amplifier of individual capability. At first glance, this interpretation seems reasonable. For many users, it accurately describes their first experience of the technology. AI can increase output, reduce friction, and accelerate tasks that previously consumed hours of professional time. Yet this interpretation captures only the earliest stage of AI adoption. At more advanced levels of use, a different pattern begins to emerge. The most significant differences in outcomes are no longer explained by the technology itself. Professionals working with identical models often produce radically different results. Some generate competent but unremarkable outputs. Others produce sophisticated analyses, strategic frameworks, novel insights, and entirely new forms of intellectual work. The explanation cannot be found in the machine alone. What distinguishes these users is not access to a different AI system, but the presence of a different cognitive architecture. The more accurate formula is, therefore, human plus method plus AI equal to scalable cognition. This formulation changes the role of AI completely. AI ceases to be the central actor. It becomes a variable operating within a larger structure. The decisive factor is no longer the model itself, but the method through which the model is directed, constrained, and integrated into a reproducible process of reasoning. AI does not primarily amplify knowledge. It amplifies structure. The quality of the output, therefore, depends less on the sophistication of the tool than on the sophistication of the form within which the tool operates. Where a mature methodology exists, AI can scale cognition dramatically. Where no such methodology exists, AI can scale confusion, inconsistency, and noise with equal efficiency. The central question of the AI era is therefore not whether professionals have access to artificial intelligence. The central question is whether their expertise possesses a form that artificial intelligence can amplify. Second, the black box method. The second misunderstanding concerns the nature of professional expertise itself. Many professions contain people who can produce impressive results without being able to explain the method by which those results were produced. This is not necessarily because they are dishonest or incompetent. On the contrary, they may be highly capable. They may have years of experience, strong intuition, deep subject knowledge, and a refined sense of professional judgment. The difficulty is different. Their expertise works, but it does not yet have a transferable form. A person may deliver an excellent presentation, produce a sophisticated legal argument, design an effective system, identify a hidden strategic risk, or generate an elegant solution to a difficult problem. The result may be genuinely impressive. Yet when others ask how the result was obtained, the explanation becomes uncertain. The process cannot be reconstructed with sufficient clarity. The conditions of success cannot be identified. The method cannot be taught. The result cannot be reproduced by another professional with comparable reliability. This is the black box method. It produces outputs, but it does not disclose its own architecture. For a long time, professional culture tolerated this. In some fields, it even rewarded it. The mysterious expert has always possessed a certain social authority. The person who appears simply to see the solution is often treated as more gifted than the person who slowly explains the method. Intuition acquires prestige. opacity becomes part of professional charisma. The expert's inability to articulate process is treated not as a weakness of method, but as evidence of rare judgment. Artificial intelligence begins to undermine that prestige. The reason is that AI creates pressure for reproducibility. If a professional claims that AI has helped them produce an impressive outcome, the next question is no longer merely whether the outcome is good. The next question is whether the process can be repeated by others under comparable conditions. How was the task framed? What data was supplied? What sequence of prompts or operations was used? What criteria governed selection, rejection, and verification? Which parts of the result came from the machine, which from the human, and which from the interaction between them? At that moment, performance is no longer enough. The professional must disclose the form of the work. This is precisely where many impressive AI demonstrations fail. They show what can be produced, but not how production can be governed. A polished output appears on the screen: a report, a strategy, a prototype, a legal analysis, a research synthesis. It may be excellent. Yet if the presenter cannot explain how another competent person could obtain a comparable result, the demonstration remains epistemically weak. It is not yet method. It is performance. The distinction is crucial. Performance persuades. Method transfers. Performance impresses the audience. Method allows the audience to reproduce, test, and improve the result. This is why the black box method becomes increasingly unstable in the AI era. When AI is treated as a magical assistant, impressive outputs can be produced without disciplined explanation. But when AI is treated as part of professional knowledge, the standard changes. The result must be capable of being situated within a reproducible cognitive architecture. This does not mean that every professional process must become mechanical or rigid. Complex work will always involve judgment, interpretation, and adaptation. A litigation strategy, a medical diagnosis, an engineering design, or an academic argument cannot be reduced to a simple checklist without losing its intelligence. But judgment does not excuse the absence of form. On the contrary, the more complex the judgment, the more important it becomes to distinguish between the variable and the constant. The data may vary, the AI tool may vary, the factual matrix may vary, the professional context may vary. But if there is a method, something remains stable across cases: the order of inquiry, the logic of classification, the verification steps, the escalation points, the criteria for confidence, the way uncertainty is preserved, and the way outputs are translated back into professional responsibility. That stable architecture is form. Without it, AI-assisted expertise remains trapped inside the black box method. It may generate impressive work, but it cannot become institutional knowledge. It cannot be reliably taught. It cannot be audited. It cannot be governed. It cannot become a professional standard. The black box method was tolerable when expertise remained embodied in individuals. It becomes dangerous when expertise is mediated by machines. Because once AI enters the process, opacity no longer belongs only to the expert. It becomes layered. The professional may not understand their own method. The model may not be fully interpretable, and the interaction between them may be undocumented. The result is not expertise amplified by AI, it is uncertainty amplified by AI. This is why artificial intelligence does not merely create a need for better tools. It creates a need for better methods. The profession that cannot explain how it thinks will struggle to govern the machine that now thinks with it. Third, why AI changes the question. Artificial intelligence changes the question because it unsettles the usual relationship between tool, user, and result. In earlier technological transitions, the tool could often be treated as the decisive novelty. A better database improved retrieval. A better spreadsheet improved calculation. A better case management system improved workflow. The professional remained the principal source of judgment, and the technology improved the speed, storage, or organization of supporting operations. AI does something more disruptive. It enters the space where professional judgment begins to take form. A generative model does not merely retrieve information or store material. It proposes language, structure, classification, emphasis, sequence, analogy, and interpretation. It can produce a first draft of reasoning before the human has fully articulated the reasoning. It can impose coherence on material that has not yet been properly understood. It can make a weak frame appear plausible, and a premature conclusion appear polished. This changes the diagnostic question. The most important question is no longer simply which model is better, nor is it merely which platform is safer, faster, or more accurate. Those questions matter, but they are secondary. They assume that the professional process already has a stable form, and that AI is merely being inserted into it. In complex professional work, that assumption is often false. AI reveals whether the process had a form in the first place. This is why two professionals using the same system can produce radically different results. The machine may be identical. The interface may be identical. The subscription level may be identical. Yet one user obtains fluent generalities, while another produces sophisticated analysis, structured strategy, a reliable research map, or a coherent litigation architecture. The difference lies not in access, but in organization. AI amplifies the way intelligence is organized. If the user brings only a vague intention, AI amplifies vagueness. If the user brings a premature frame, AI amplifies premature coherence. If the user brings a poorly formed question, AI produces a polished answer to the wrong problem. But if the user brings a disciplined method, AI can extend that method across more material, more variations, and more iterations than the unaided human mind could normally manage. This is the central shift. AI does not merely increase capacity. It scales cognitive form. That is why the current professional obsession with prompts is inadequate. Prompts are not unimportant, but prompts are surface instructions. They are not by themselves a methodology. A prompt can ask for a chronology, but it cannot know whether chronology is the correct form for the matter. A prompt can ask for arguments, but it cannot know whether the legal issue has been properly borne. A prompt can ask for risks, but it cannot determine which risks belong to evidence, which belong to law, which belong to institutional behavior, and which belong to strategy. Those distinctions come from method. The professional task therefore shifts from tool use to form design. The advanced user of AI is not merely someone who knows how to ask better questions. The advanced user is someone who knows how to build the cognitive conditions under which an answer becomes meaningful. That requires sequencing, classification, verification, escalation, uncertainty management, and a theory of what the output is supposed to do. In legal work, this distinction is decisive. A model can summarize authorities, but it cannot by itself determine whether the authorities answer the right question. It can draft a pleading, but it cannot know whether the facts have matured into pleadable allegations. It can produce an argument, but it cannot bear the professional responsibility for choosing the frame within which that argument enters the world. AI therefore changes the question from, "What can this tool do?" to, "What form of cognition is this tool being asked to amplify?" Once the question is framed in this way, the hierarchy changes. The model becomes variable, the method becomes central. The expert is no longer merely a user of AI, but the architect of the conditions under which AI can produce disciplined knowledge rather than fluent noise. This is why AI is so revealing. It does not only show who can use technology, it shows who had a method before the technology arrived. Distinction between expertise and form ultimately leads to a deeper question. What exactly is a form? The term is often used casually, as though it refers merely to structure, process, or organization. Yet in professional life, form performs a far more significant function. Form is the mechanism through which intelligence becomes reproducible. A result is not a form. Knowledge is not a form. Even intelligence itself is not a form. Form is the reproducible architecture through which intelligence, whether human or artificial, generates results. This distinction may appear subtle, but it has profound consequences. A highly intelligent individual may produce remarkable outcomes, while possessing little or no transferable form. Their success remains dependent upon personal intuition, accumulated experience, unconscious pattern recognition, and individual judgment. Such a person may be exceptionally capable, yet their capability remains difficult to explain, difficult to teach, and difficult to scale beyond themselves. A form solves a different problem. A form allows cognition to survive its creator. Scientific method is a form because it permits knowledge to be reproduced by researchers who were not present at the original discovery. Legal procedure is a form because it allows disputes to be processed according to principles that extend beyond the judgment of a single lawyer or judge. Accounting standards are forms because they transform individual financial interpretation into institutional practice. Engineering methodologies are forms because they make complex technical knowledge transferable across generations of practitioners. In every case, form performs the same function. It stabilizes cognition. The purpose of form is therefore not simply to produce outcomes. Its purpose is to make outcomes reproducible beyond the individual who first achieved them. This observation explains a recurring pattern throughout professional history. Some practices scale, others do not. Some organizations accumulate knowledge over decades and continue to improve despite changes in personnel. Others remain dependent upon a handful of gifted individuals. Once those individuals leave, performance deteriorates. The difference often lies not in intelligence, resources, or effort, but in the existence of form. Where form exists, cognition becomes institutional. Where form is absent, cognition remains personal. This distinction becomes particularly important in the age of artificial intelligence because AI is fundamentally indifferent to expertise. AI cannot directly amplify experience, intuition, or judgment. What it can amplify is the structure within which those capacities operate. This is why AI frequently produces such uneven results. Organizations often assume that introducing advanced technology will automatically increase performance. Yet technology cannot compensate for the absence of form. If knowledge remains embedded in individuals, if reasoning remains undocumented, if decision-making relies upon tacit assumptions that nobody can articulate, AI has very little stable architecture to amplify. The result is often mistaken for an AI problem. In reality, it is a form problem. The technology merely exposes what was already present. The same phenomenon can be observed in legal practice. Experienced lawyers often describe successful litigation as a matter of judgment. They are not wrong. Judgment matters enormously. Yet judgment itself operates within a hidden architecture. Cases are framed. Evidence is classified. Timelines are constructed. Contradictions are identified. Authorities are selected. Hypotheses are tested. Strategic options are compared. Risks are prioritized. These operations do not occur randomly. They follow patterns. The more those patterns become explicit, reproducible, and teachable, the more they begin to resemble form rather than personal instinct. This is why the most valuable professional asset in the AI era may not be knowledge itself. Knowledge is increasingly abundant. Information is increasingly accessible. Even analysis is becoming partially automated. What remains scarce is the ability to transform knowledge into durable cognitive architecture. The rule of form emerges from this observation. The central proposition is simple. Every successful professional practice contains forms, whether recognized or not. Some forms are explicit. Others remain hidden inside institutions, professions, or individuals. Artificial intelligence does not create these forms, nor does it replace them. It reveals them. Where strong forms exist, AI can amplify them dramatically. Where forms are weak, fragmented, or absent, AI exposes the underlying instability. The future of professional expertise may therefore depend less on the possession of knowledge, and more on the ability to identify, construct, and govern forms, through which knowledge becomes transferable, reproducible, and scalable. In this sense, form is not merely an organizational convenience, it is the infrastructure of intelligence itself. Fifth, AI as an epistemological stress test. One of the most common mistakes in contemporary discussions about artificial intelligence is to treat it primarily as a technological development. Certainly, AI is a technological development. It depends upon advances in computing power, machine learning architectures, training methods, and data infrastructure. Yet to describe AI solely in technological terms is to miss its deeper significance. The most important effect of AI may not be technological at all. It may be epistemological. Artificial intelligence functions as an unusually effective diagnostic instrument. It tests not only what professions do, but how professions know. It forces institutions, organizations, and individuals to confront assumptions about knowledge that have often remained invisible for generations. For centuries, professional competence could be demonstrated through performance. A lawyer won cases. A consultant solved problems. An academic published influential work. A manager delivered results. Success itself became evidence that knowledge existed. The internal architecture of that knowledge often remained unexplored. As long as outcomes were satisfactory, few people asked whether the underlying reasoning could be reproduced systematically by others. The expert's success served as proof of expertise. AI disrupts this arrangement because it introduces an unexpected challenge. It separates outcomes from explanations. A professional may produce an excellent result with the assistance of AI, yet the existence of the result no longer tells us very much about the quality of the underlying knowledge. The critical question shifts from the output itself to the process that produced it. Can the reasoning be reconstructed? Can the process be repeated? Can another competent professional achieve comparable results using the same methodology? Can the assumptions be examined? Can the decision points be audited? Can the architecture of judgment be made visible? These questions move the discussion from technology to epistemology. They force us to ask what kind of knowledge is actually present. This is where AI becomes a stress test. A stress test does not create strength or weakness, it reveals it. The banking stress tests introduced after the financial crisis did not create vulnerabilities inside financial institutions. They exposed vulnerabilities that already existed. Likewise, artificial intelligence does not create methodological weaknesses inside professions. It makes those weaknesses visible. Where a profession has developed strong forms, AI often produces extraordinary results. Existing methodologies become faster, more scalable, and more comprehensive. The machine extends the reach of an already coherent cognitive architecture. Human capability expands because the underlying structure was already present. The opposite is equally revealing. Where form is absent, AI reveals the absence. The technology may still generate impressive outputs, reports appear sophisticated, analyses appear rigorous, recommendations appear persuasive. Yet the process remains opaque. Nobody can fully explain why one output was selected over another. Nobody can identify the exact source of the conclusion. Nobody can reliably teach the process to a new practitioner. What appears to be knowledge begins to look increasingly like successful practice. This distinction is crucial. Knowledge and successful practice are not identical. A person may repeatedly achieve good outcomes without possessing a fully articulated methodology. Experience, intuition, and tacit judgment can produce remarkable performance, yet such performance often remains embedded within the individual. It cannot easily be transferred to colleagues, institutionalized within organizations, or scaled across larger systems. Knowledge, by contrast, possesses a different quality. Knowledge can survive its creator. It can be communicated, criticized, improved, replicated, and governed. This is precisely why AI creates such discomfort in many professions. It exposes the gap between outcomes and explanation. It reveals the difference between a practitioner who knows how to achieve a result and a practitioner who understands the architecture through which that result emerges. The challenge becomes particularly acute in knowledge-intensive fields such as law, medicine, governance, and research. These professions have traditionally relied upon combinations of formal rules and informal judgment. AI forces them to distinguish more clearly between the two. What is the reproducible method? What is the professional judgment? What can be delegated? What must remain human? What belongs to process? What belongs to responsibility? These questions cannot be answered by technology alone. They are epistemological questions. For this reason, the deepest impact of artificial intelligence may not be that it automates work. Its deeper impact may be that it changes how professions understand knowledge itself. The central issue is no longer whether a machine can produce an answer. The central issue is whether the profession can explain how an answer becomes knowledge. In this sense, artificial intelligence is not merely a tool of cognition. It is a test of cognition. More precisely, it is a test of whether what we call expertise is genuinely knowledge, or whether it is simply successful practice that has never been required to explain itself. Sixth, litigation as a case study in form. Legal practice provides an unusually revealing example of the relationship between expertise, form, and artificial intelligence. Litigation has always depended on more than legal knowledge. A serious dispute is not a single problem. It is a moving field of documents, facts, allegations, silences, procedural choices, evidential gaps, institutional behaviors, risks, costs, remedies, and time limits. The successful litigator does not merely know the law. The successful litigator gives form to disorder. Traditionally, this work has been described through the language of judgment, experience, and intuition. These descriptions are not wrong. Judgment matters, experience matters, intuition matters. But they do not fully explain what is happening when a complex dispute is made legally intelligible. A litigation mind performs a sequence of cognitive operations. Documents are classified, chronologies are constructed, claims are separated from evidence, facts are distinguished from inference, contradictions are identified, responsibility nodes are mapped, procedural routes are compared, disclosure questions are formulated, legal arguments are stress-tested against evidential weakness, opponent strategy, and forum constraints. Once these operations are made explicit, litigation begins to look less like mystical professional instinct and more like cognitive architecture. This matters because artificial intelligence can now operate within that architecture. The specific model is secondary. ChatGPT may perform some operations, Claude may perform others. A future model may perform them with greater sophistication. The documents will vary, the facts will vary, the legal issues will vary. But the architecture can remain stable. This is the crucial point. What AI amplifies is not the machine. What AI amplifies is the form. This changes the historical position of the individual professional. For most of human history, institutional power depended upon collective form. No individual could hold enough memory, process enough information, manage enough communications, or sustain enough continuity to operate at institutional scale. Institutions existed because cognition without form remained personal. Once cognition acquired form, it could become collective, durable, and authoritative. Courts, universities, law firms, government departments, and corporations all depend upon this principle. Their power lies not merely in the people who occupy them, but in the forms that allow knowledge, authority, and procedure to survive the individual. Where form is absent, cognition remains personal. Where form exists, cognition becomes institutional. Artificial intelligence now changes this historical limitation. For the first time, an individual can begin to operate with a degree of cognitive extension that previously required an institution. One person can process large bodies of documents, maintain multiple analytical tracks, construct strategic maps, test alternative arguments, preserve memory, generate drafts, compare positions, and iterate reasoning across a scale that would once have required a team. This does not mean that the individual becomes an institution in the formal legal sense. It means something more precise and more interesting. An individual who possesses form can now acquire institution-like cognitive capacity. This may become one of the most significant consequences of AI. The old distinction was between the individual expert and the institution. The expert possessed judgment but limited scale. The institution possessed scale but required bureaucratic form. AI begins to disturb this arrangement by giving the form-bearing individual access to scale. The implications for law are considerable. Public law, for example, has often developed slowly because individuals lack the practical capacity to challenge complex institutional architectures. A public authority may distribute responsibility across departments, policies, records, decision chains, and procedural layers. The individual claimant faces not only a legal opponent, but an institutional memory system. Historically, this asymmetry has been difficult to overcome. AI-assisted legal cognition begins to alter that asymmetry. A single lawyer, if supported by a disciplined methodology, can now construct timelines, detect contradictions, map institutional responsibility, track documentary patterns, and generate disclosure strategies at a level that previously required far greater resources. The machine does not replace legal judgment. It extends the reach of a form that already exists. This is why litigation is such an important case study. It shows the difference between a star professional and a form-bearing professional. The star litigator may be brilliant. They may possess tactical instinct, advocacy skill, intellectual speed, and deep experience. But if their knowledge remains embodied only in them, it disappears with them. When they retire, the profession remembers their reputation, not necessarily their method. They leave a legacy. But not always a system. A form-bearing lawyer operates differently. Their value lies not only in winning cases or producing impressive arguments, but in creating a transferable architecture of legal cognition. Their method can be taught, repeated, adapted, audited, and improved. It can survive the individual. It can become a school, a practice, a discipline, perhaps even an institution. This is the distinction AI now makes visible. The legal profession has always produced stars. The AI era may produce something else, individual legal architects capable of building cognitive institutions around their methods. That is not a fantasy of individual power. It is a consequence of form. Where there is no form, AI merely increases output. Where form exists, AI can scale cognition. And where cognition can be scaled, the individual professional is no longer limited to the biological and administrative boundaries that previously separated personal expertise from institutional capacity. Litigation therefore demonstrates the central thesis of this article in practical form. AI does not replace legal expertise. It reveals whether legal expertise has been organized into a form capable of becoming more than personal talent. It reveals whether a lawyer is merely a brilliant practitioner, or whether their intelligence can become a durable architecture. Seventh, from reputation to methodology. The shift from expertise to cognitive architecture may also change the meaning of professional reputation. Professional reputation has traditionally been retrospective. A law firm is trusted because it has existed for a long time, acted in important matters, employed distinguished lawyers, appeared in directories, received rankings, served prominent clients, or produced celebrated practitioners. Its authority is built from accumulated signals of past competence. This form of reputation is not meaningless. History matters. Institutional memory matters. Professional standards matter. A firm that has survived, adapted, and performed over time possesses something that should not be dismissed lightly. Yet the AI era introduces a new pressure. Past reputation does not, by itself, explain present method. A client facing a serious legal problem does not instruct the abstract memory of historic excellence. The client instructs a living system of legal work. The question is not merely whether the firm has produced brilliant lawyers in the past. The question is how the firm now thinks, analyses, verifies, challenges, structures, and solves legal problems. This distinction may become increasingly important as AI makes professional methods more visible. A firm can no longer rely only on the symbolic authority of reputation. It may be asked to demonstrate the architecture behind its work. How does it analyze complex disputes? How does it classify evidence? How does it test arguments? How does it manage uncertainty? How does it identify responsibility? How does it use AI without allowing AI to become invisible authority? How does it preserve professional judgment while scaling analytical capacity? These questions mark a shift from reputation as inherited prestige to reputation as demonstrable methodology. This may be one of the most significant market changes produced by artificial intelligence. In the traditional model, clients often choose between firms based on proxies, brand, rankings, senior names, recommendations, sector familiarity, perceived authority, or confidence in the relationship partner. These proxies will not disappear, but they may become insufficient. As AI-assisted work becomes more common, clients may increasingly distinguish between firms not only by status, but by method. One firm may say, "We have excellent lawyers." Another may say, "We have a litigation methodology that classifies documents, separates facts from inference, maps responsibility nodes, identifies contradictions, stress tests pleadings, preserves uncertainty, and integrates AI within a governed analytical process." The second claim is different in kind. It does not merely invite trust. It offers a structure through which trust can be examined. This is where competition may begin to shift. Law firms may no longer compete only through reputation, price, sector expertise, or individual talent. They may increasingly compete through cognitive architectures, the distinctive methods by which they transform complexity into legal strategy. In that environment, a firm's true intellectual asset is not simply what its lawyers know. It is the form in which the firm's knowledge exists. This form may become increasingly identifiable. A sophisticated firm could develop a recognizable imprint of legal intelligence, a distinctive way of approaching disputes, managing evidence, designing strategy, using AI, interrogating institutional behavior, and translating legal uncertainty into action. That imprint would not be reducible to branding. It would be a genuine methodological signature. The implications are considerable. If professional knowledge can be formalized, taught, supported by AI, and reproduced across matters, then the firm becomes less dependent on isolated brilliance. Its best thinking can become more durable. Its younger lawyers can be trained not merely in tasks, but in the firm's cognitive architecture. Its clients can understand not only who will work on the matter, but how the matter will be worked on. This does not eliminate the importance of individual lawyers. On the contrary, it raises the standard expected of them. The lawyer of the AI era must be more than a bearer of knowledge or a performer of professional confidence. The lawyer must be able to operate within, refine, and sometimes challenge the forms through which legal intelligence is produced. The same applies to firms. A firm that cannot describe its method may still possess talent. It may still win cases. It may still enjoy reputation. But in an AI-enabled market, that may no longer be enough. The client may increasingly ask a more demanding question. What is your methodology? This is a profound change. It means that professional reputation may become less mystical and more architectural. The future prestige of a law firm may rest not only on the names it has employed, the matters it has handled, or the rankings it has obtained, but on the demonstrable quality of the cognitive forms through which it produces legal results. The market may therefore move from competition between stars to competition between methods, and once that happens, legal reputation itself begins to acquire form. Eighth conclusion, the end of mystical expertise. The age of mystical expertise may be coming to an end. Not because expertise is disappearing, not because professionals are becoming less important, and not because artificial intelligence is replacing human judgment. The deeper change lies elsewhere. For generations, it was possible to succeed professionally while leaving method largely implicit. Performance concealed the underlying architecture of cognition. The expert produced results, and the results themselves became evidence of competence. Society rarely demanded more. The process remained hidden inside the individual. Artificial intelligence changes this arrangement because it makes cognitive structure increasingly visible. It forces professions to ask questions that were once optional. How is this conclusion reached? What sequence of reasoning produced this result? What assumptions are being applied? What parts of the process are transferable? What parts depend upon judgment? What parts can be reproduced? What parts remain unique? In doing so, AI reveals something that extends far beyond technology, law, or professional practice. For the first time in human history, we possess tools capable of analyzing cognition at a scale and level of detail that was previously impossible. We can decompose complex intellectual work into constituent operations. We can separate pattern recognition from verification, intuition from procedure, memory from analysis, judgment from execution. We can begin to identify the hidden structures through which expertise emerges. In a sense, humanity has acquired the ability to disassemble parts of its own cognitive machinery. This is historically significant because institutions themselves were originally created to compensate for human limitations. No individual could hold enough information, process enough complexity, or sustain enough continuity to rival the cognitive capacity of an organized institution. Forms emerged because biological cognition was finite. Artificial intelligence begins to alter this relationship. It allows us not only to analyze cognitive processes, but also to reconstruct them. We can decompose expertise into methods, protocols, decision architectures, and forms. We can examine which elements produce value and which merely survive through tradition. We can distinguish between what is essential and what is accidental. Most importantly, we can begin to recombine those elements deliberately. The significance of this development should not be underestimated. For centuries, knowledge was primarily accumulated. Today, knowledge can increasingly be analyzed. Tomorrow, it may be designed. This is the transition from expertise as inheritance to expertise as architecture. The professions that thrive in the coming decades will not necessarily be those that possess the largest bodies of knowledge. They will be those that learn how to identify, preserve, refine, and scale the forms through which knowledge becomes effective. The same principle applies to individuals. Artificial intelligence allows us to examine our own methods of thinking with unprecedented clarity. It allows us to identify strengths, weaknesses, biases, blind spots, heuristics, and cognitive patterns that previously remained invisible. It allows us to ask not merely what we know, but how we know. And once a form becomes visible, it can be improved. Once it can be improved, it can be taught. Once it can be taught, it can be scaled. Once it can be scaled, it can become something larger than the individual who first created it. This may ultimately become the most profound consequence of artificial intelligence. Not that it thinks for us, but that it allows us to understand, formalize, and extend the architectures through which we think ourselves. The future may therefore belong neither to machines nor to experts. It may belong to those who can transform expertise into form into methodology, and methodology into scalable cognition. Artificial intelligence does not replace expertise. It reveals whether expertise has a form, and for the first time in human history, It gives us the possibility of consciously redesigning that form.